we have heard many people now praise Brock Purdy. We had Dante Whitner, who calls games for them, broadcasts out there in the Bay Area, former player for the 49ers. He's talked about Purdy as the MVP on this show. We have had on ESPN, you've heard Rex Ryan say he was the next Joe Montana. He's the first one I heard him compare him to Joe Montana. And now Joe Montana's favorite receiver, a guy that many think, Rob, is not only the best, pretty much everybody thinks he's the best wide receiver ever, but people even think he's the best football player, period. That, of course, being Jerry Rice, and who won 2 Super Bowls with Montana. And here he is, Rob, talking about Brock Purdy.
Brock reminds me a lot of Montana, his coolness. He doesn't get rattled. Mm-hmm. You need your quarterback to be that way.
Right.
What he's doing, the leadership, his composure, watching him when he first took over, the velocity behind his throws. Hey man, tight spiral, catchable ball, like that. I love it, man. And his decision making, he doesn't hold on to the ball that long.
What do you think, Rob?
He was just talking about being cool like Joe Montana. That's the only mention he made of Joe Montana, his coolness. That's fine.
He said a lot of I'm not saying he's Joe Montana. I'm just saying he did say more than that. He talked
to me, that's all that.
He talked about the quick release. He talked about the accuracy. If you listen to the clip, he
said he was cool. MVP?
No, we ain't talking about him being MVP.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying what he said. You want to hear it again? Because I'm just saying he didn't just say he was cool like Joe Montana. He brought up a lot of things.
Right, but when you talk about the Joe Montana part is when he talked about his coolness, right? And not –
He said he reminds me a lot of Joe Montana. He said his coolness, and then he started talking about his other qualities. So I took it like he was saying those other qualities reminded him of Joe.
Oh, I didn't take it that way. Okay.
So that's all you got to say about it?
Yeah, what do you say? What do you have to say about it? We've talked about Brock Purdy, and I know you're high on him, which is cool, and he's in the running for the MVP. But I'm more like, who do we have on yesterday? The GM. Randy Mueller. I'm when Randy and I are in lockstep. And Randy, the guy who's been in the league. And he looked at it and was with me with Lamar. And he looked at the stuff that Lamar does. So I'm a Lamar guy as far as MVP, despite the numbers. But go ahead. What did you think about Jerry Rice and his endorsement? Is that what you got from it?
I'm not even talking about MVP. I'm talking about him comparing Brock Purdy to Joe Montana. I'm not going to sit here and say Brock Purdy is going to be Joe Montana or close. Joe Montana, you think he's the GOAT, and that's fair. He's in the discussion. I think he's second, right behind Tom Brady. I think but everybody would have him in their top 5. So you're talking about an absolute, all-time great. So I'm not going to sit here and say Brock Purdy is going to be
I got
that.
you.
But I do agree with Jerry in that, Rob, I am big on intangibles when it comes to top quarterbacks. I think Tom Brady, all of them, there's a certain physical standard, if you will, that you have to meet. If you can't meet a certain physical threshold of ability, arm strength, and we're talking about quarterbacks, arm strength, some degree of athleticism, maybe not athletic relative to other NFL players, but some degree of athleticism. Like there's a bar you have to hit. And if you can hit that bar, then I think intangibles are very important when we talk about excellent quarterbacks. Brady, the GOAT, not the strongest arm in the world. Good arm, but not the strongest in the world. Montana, not the strongest arm in the world. But those two and many of the other top ones had the coolness Jerry Rice was talking about, the composure under pressure, make quick decisions, accurate with their passes, can make all of the throws, and process quickly. If the first option is not the second option, not the third, they're on to the third or fourth option quicker than most quarterbacks. I think those things are incredibly important when we talk about quarterbacking at the NFL level. And I think that's why we see some guys that aren't the best athletes, or guys that weren't even like incredible superstars in college or at the biggest programs, the Alabamas, the USCs, and so on and so forth, who go on and have sometimes be some of the greatest college or NFL quarterbacks we've ever seen, because they're not like at Alabama, you're throwing to the best receivers that are way better than everybody else. And so are your linemen and everybody else on your team. And so you don't generally have to go past the first or second option a lot, whereas other quarterbacks may have to process longer, may have to make more out of nothing than a guy at a big school. Sometimes it's not a rule, but it's a lot of times that's the case. And I think Purdy has all that. So I think that's similar to Montana. And also, Rob, you know this, Montana was a 3rd round pick. Montana was the 4th quarterback taken in his draft in 1979. Montana didn't start his first 2 years in San Francisco. Montana was good in college. He doesn't lighten it up. He was a part-time starter most of his college career at Notre Dame. And then, he had moments, though, that made you think, oh, maybe. He had big moments. And I know numbers are different, but just his 3 years essentially in college, 25 touchdowns, 25 picks. It's not the same as today, but that's also not, going to make anybody go crazy. And obviously he became one of the best we've ever seen in the pros. So I think those things are similar. Where I think is different, Rob, and look, I've been one to say, well, Montana had Rice and Montana had Roger Craig, who was great, even though he wasn't a Hall of Famer. And he had John Taylor, who was great after the catch, even though he wasn't a Hall of Famer and all that. And all that's true. But that was when Montana won MVPs, 89, 90. Montana, Rob, won 2 Super Bowls before Jerry Rice walked in the door.
I tell people all the time when I give his resume, 2 with Jerry and 2 without. So don't make it like it's all Jerry Rice.
He wasn't that. And that's where I think is the difference. I'm not saying Purdy couldn't be good. I'm not going to say he win Super Bowls without these guys. I'm not even going to say, I don't know that he'd be good or great without these weapons he has. I know Montana was. And Dwight Clark was good, but he's not a Hall of Famer. And some of the other players that he had were good. They won 2 Super Bowls. But, Rob, to me, that's the difference. Purdy, we may never see Purdy without a stacked team, or at least not for a while. So it's hard to compare that. But those are my comparisons, and then those are my differences in that Montana would have been great. He was great with or without Jerry Rice and a lot of other great skill position players. We don't know that about Purdy.
Yeah, no, that's always been my case with Joe Montana. It's like for people, when you just look at it, his resume is ridiculous. It just is. The 4 Super Bowls, Chris.
Yep.
2 with Jerry, 2 without Jerry. 11 touchdowns.
The pass, remember, Rob, a lot of people highlight was to Dwight Clark.
Right. That's a great throw to Dwight Clark. And I said, and Chrissy had 11 touchdowns, no picks in the Super Bowl. He won the MVP in the Super Bowl three times. And the other one is, Chris, 2 of those Super Bowls, he needed a touchdown to win the game, not a field goal. Like he had to get a touchdown.
Right.
And it's different. It's not taken away from anybody else, but when your team needed to win 2 Super Bowls where you need a touchdown to win the game, and he gets it done. I mean, his resume is
that coolness.
And he has doesn't he have the highest quarterback rating of anybody in the Super Bowl, right? Like I think he has that. Doesn't he have?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
Rob G looked that up.
I think he owns that as well, Chris. So it just speaks volumes as far as what he was able to do. He's a one-of-a-kind guy. And I think that's why a lot of people look at him. And if they're not on the Brady train, it's hard not to think of Joe Montana because people thought of Joe Montana, and that's what separates him from Dan Marino. Dan Marino did a lot of stuff in a league, Chris, that wasn't throwing the football like that.
He was putting up modern-day numbers.
Right. He was doing that now, back in the 80s. Right. So that's what makes him so impressive and why people overlook that he only got to that 1 Super Bowl his second year and never got back.
Yep.
Because it's incredible what he's able to do. So,
yeah, and that's what I mean by intangibles. I mean, nobody in their right mind would say Montana was more physically gifted than Marino, but between the years, he had it all. And so, yeah, I think Brock Purdy, we'll see what he ends up doing. I'm not even going to sit here and say I've never compared him to Montana other than this conversation. You know, I saw Rex Ryan do it. Now we've seen Rice do it. I'm not going to do that. I'll talk about them and their similarities and differences now because it's a topic. But I'll just say this, Rob. You don't, and I'm not saying he's going to be this, but you don't become that guy until you become that guy. Like Joe Montana, nobody thought he was going to be Joe Montana until he was Joe Montana. Tom Brady, nobody thought. Kurt Warner, nobody thought. And I don't know. We'll see what Brock Purdy becomes. But there's guys that come from, nowhere, so to speak, that become great, that because of where they came from, you're going to underrate them until they make it to the point where you just can't anymore.
That's why
you have to acknowledge their greatness.
But that's what I've said about Brock Purdy with the whole this season and everything, that no matter what, fair or not, Chris, it's not fair to be honest, they will not rubber stamp him until they see in the postseason that he gets them to where they are supposed to go. And obviously, we talked about it before. If the defense gives up 45 points, no one's going to be blaming Brock Purdy. But until he can win for them, that's the ultimate stamp. That's when people can no longer wonder or question, you know what I mean, where you are and where you fit in. And that's how it's going to be for him.